talked about Tamaki. Are there any other areas in
Yes,
Auckland?
well, if you look at an area like Tamaki, you look at an area like Hobsonville, I would draw your attention to a project like Three Kings. Fletcher's has been trying to develop that quarry for more than 5 years. That's 1,500 homes that could have been built underway right now if it was not for the very ham-fisted process that's been around doing urban redevelopment. We would see that as the sort of site where an urban development authority would enable us to get better quality development and more houses.
But you won't be able to compulsorily acquire land as was recommended by the Productivity Commission.
Yes, the urban development authorities will be able to acquire land for those UDA areas, but they will not be able to go beyond the existing powers of the Public Works Act. So the current Public Works Act allows areas to be acquired for roading, for parks, and for particular types of developments. What we're not proposing to do is to extend those powers of the Public Works Act. We believe in their current form they go far enough for us to be able to make these urban development authorities work.
So if there was a holdout homeowner in a particular area where you wanted to build 300 houses but you couldn't because of one person holding out, what would you be able to do under this new legislation?
The current Public Works Act allows homes to be able to be acquired, or any other buildings, if they are for the purposes of infrastructure or for roading or the like, and there are also provisions that allow it to be used in housing, albeit those powers have to meet some strict tests. We are proposing not to change those tests that are in the current Public Works Act.
So could a private organisation create a urban development authority, or only council in the government?
An urban development authority can only be created with the support of both the government and the council. So either the government or council could propose them, but they could only proceed if they are supported by both government and council. Now, the Urban Development Authority is a public entity that has all the accountabilities of a public organisation, but it may be developing area of a private space. If I give an example, for instance, such as Three Kings, the council and the government could create a UDA for that area. That UDA would have regulatory powers to be able to approve the development, but the land ownership and the development would still be done by the private owner. In that particular case is Fletcher's.
So would the UDA take over all the consenting from the council, all that stuff would all be done by the UDA?
Correct. All of the resource consenting, all of the issues around the water infrastructure, the public transport infrastructure, all of the issues around the public reserves, the changing of land titles, but the issue of building consenting would still remain with the Building Consenting Authority and the council
and who pays
to ensure
for the UDA and the running of all that?
The Urban Development Authority could be paid for by council, could be paid for by government, could be funded by private sector levies on the landowners in that particular area. What this legislation does is empowering legislation to create UDAs, and then in each individual circumstance they would have a different structure and funding. It is likely that if those UDAs involve public land, such as the example with Tamaki or Hobsonville, the government would need to provide substantive finance for those organisations to both be able to acquire the land and to be able to do the substantive building development.
Is the government planning on providing finance for UDAs in Tamaki and Hobsonville and other places?
Yeah, if you look at both the case of Hobsonville and the case of Tamaki, the government has provided substantive capital, hundreds of millions of dollars for both of those. We would expect that to be the case in future. The key thing here is that neither Hobsonville nor Tamaki have any regulatory powers. They have to find their way through the labyrinth of red tape, and the big advantage of these reforms is that you'd be able to progress those sorts of developments 3 to 5 years faster.
Would your average homeowner who lives next to one of these UDAs, though, potentially lose the ability to appeal in the Environment Court and those sorts of things because of this fast-tracking consent?
The Urban Development Authority would still have an obligation and a legal requirement to consult with the local community about the nature of the development they are doing, but it is proposed under this UDA that the powers of appeal, for instance to the Environment Court, would be curtailed to ensure that those projects are able to advance more quickly.
So they couldn't object to the Environment Court if they were next door and they felt that they didn't like it or something?
The specific proposal in the discussion paper we put out today is that the UDA would propose a development plan. People would have an opportunity to submit on that development plan. If they wanted to further object, there would be an independent board that would then consider those objections and whether they had merit. Not dissimilar to the process that the government has created with boards of inquiries for doing major infrastructure projects like the Kapiti Expressway and the Waterview roading development in Auckland.
The normal channels wouldn't be there.
Correct. This is about fast-tracking these developments, enabling us to transform our cities more quickly and ultimately provide more houses more quickly.
Would the UDAs be able to raise money on their own behalf and charge rates or levies? Or
Yes, the specific proposal is that the Urban Development Authority would be able to levy the landowners in that area to pay for important costs of public transport infrastructure, new reserve space, and that is fair in the sense that those property owners living in that area of the UDA would benefit from those new infrastructure that would be provided.
So this is on top of normal rates for councils?
Although those areas, there's also provision in the legislation for those areas to be discounted on rates where the public services are provided by the UDA. So for instance, if a major urban development authority was to occur in an area and the new water and sewage services were being constructed by the Urban Development Authority, you wouldn't have those property owners paying levies to the UDA as well as the council for those same services.
How would you describe this change? It sounds like a pretty radical change for New Zealand in the history of town planning. I mean, it seems pretty major.
This is a huge change in that for the best part of 150 years, New Zealand's development rules have been orientated around changing countryside into urban areas. We've now matured as a country to the point where we actually need to transform some of our existing urban areas into places that are far more vibrant, provide more housing, integrate public transport, and this is about enabling New Zealand to make that big step. It is really constrained to major cities like Auckland and Wellington, and we need to learn the lessons of what's been achieved in cities like London, like Melbourne, like Singapore, like Sydney, that have used these urban development authority mechanisms to really transform cities and create places that are good for jobs, good for urban living, and good for the housing challenges we have.
Yeah, the lessons here are that the councils take so long to give consents that all of the changes that you're going to put in are going to be reliant on them speeding up their consent processes. It still takes 18 months or so for people to get to the place where they're going to be putting in a consent.
The first thing is that a key feature of the Urban Development Authority is that the consenting is managed by that UDA. The second is that the nightmare for councils is that you can have issues of land subdivision, issues of reserves, issues of roading, issues of infrastructure, all of which are controlled by different acts of parliament, all of which require different consultation processes, and the huge strength of the Urban Development Authority is it enables a single conversation to be had about where do the roads go, where do the reserves go, what sort of buildings, so that you can get the very best of housing, commercial space and amenity, and in my view will result in more dynamic cities.
So the UDAs are doing the building consent, will be...
No, the very important difference is between the resource consenting, which is around the size of the building footprint, its height and those issues, and the issues of building consenting, which remains with the council and is focused on whether the buildings are effectively safe and well designed.
Yeah, so you'll still be at the leisure of the council's building consent process.
Well, I think there's a very important issue around building consenting, and that is that it is done independently to ensure that the structures are built to the best standards. I am yet to have significant complaints around these major redevelopment projects in an argument as to whether the engineering design of the buildings is safe. The area where all the dispute is around the reconfiguration of roads, reserves, infrastructure and the resource planning issues.